Ikaiki Richard Metal Fan Talla, bringing you guys an old school album review. And today we're going to be looking into this album's 25th anniversary, and it's from one of my favorite bands ever. We're from Finland, as of course, obviously, since I introduced myself in the video in Finnish, we're going to be talking about Elegy by Amorphis, the band's third album released on May 14th, 1996 through Relapse Records. Now this, of course, follows up my favorite Amorphis album, Tales from the Thousand Lakes. And with this album, Elegy, I mean, obviously going back to Carillion Ithramis, there was just more primarily death metal. Tales from the Thousand Lakes had more of that melodic death metal styles. It wasn't even like sort of like doomy stuff. But with Elegy, they're like sort of like the next evolution in Amorphis' sound. This album primarily is a lot of like progressive metal with also has a little bit of like folky influence as well, which also still has like that elements of melodic death metal in there. And this album, they had a little bit of a lineup change. They actually have are now a 6-piece, which is funny enough that they still are to this day. And they have a clean vocalist on this album, Pasi Koskinen, and while Tomi, their other guitarist, is sort of like doing backing growls instead of like being just the main vocalist. And I honestly think this is a pretty good album. I mean, obviously with every album that Amorphis has done, they definitely have changed up styles or take a different approach to every album. And I just think Pasi, in my opinion, is a great vocalist, and he also does a little bit of growling on like 2 songs. And just the guitar playing from Essa and Tomi are great. The bass playing from Olli-Pekka Lane is really good. The bass is pretty audible. The keyboards from Kim Rantala. Like I said, I think the keyboards, especially in like death metal or melodic death metal, really add a lot of like depth and atmosphere. And the drumming from Pekka Kasasardi is pretty good. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive into this album track by track. Now, starting things off is Better Unborn. Now, I think right from the get-go, this is a great opener, and it just sounds something completely unusual. Well, that pretty much has, or just encapsulates that everything that Amorphis has done into one album. And it also has a lot of like the folklore or in like almost psychedelic passages, which are pretty much interrupted by angry growls and sort of like the great clean vocals. I like sort of like the contrast between Tomi and Pasi's voices, and I just think it's a really great way to start off this album. Then we move on to Against Windows. Now this begins just with some really great bass lines, which then it just explodes into some like a glorious surge of like melodicness and sort of like heaviness, and just follows with some insanely great verse. And I just think it's a really great song. This is honestly one of Amorphis' well-known songs, and I believe they played this live pretty much every tour since Elegy came out, and I think they might have played it the 2 times I've seen them live. I could be wrong. And then we get to The Orphan. Now, The Orphan almost is kind of like a little bit of breather after the first 2 songs. It also has like a proggish synth bringing out over some great acoustics, and I think Pasi turns in his best clean vocal performance of his career, and he belts out some really great lyrics as like the dove's heart is cold as it pecks through the village rick, but I'm colder still as I drink the icy water. Some really great lyrics. And then when it gets into like a little over 2.5 minutes in, it creates a really great percussive low end and with some really great guitar melody and sweltering choir synth, and it just a really great conclusion on the bridge. Next up is On Rich and Poor. Now it just explodes directly with a series of like kind of like great melodies, which are just really brilliant and just gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. And I just cannot feel that melody, especially around 20 seconds in. Then if you haven't heard it, then I don't know, you're probably dumb. But it has also some of the most great guitar lines I've ever heard, and it's just a very powerful charge. And I also love especially in the bridge melody, especially around 2 minutes in, it goes right back into like the original way, and it just blows your mind every time you hear it. Then we move on to My Cantale. Now, this pretty much follows up, and I don't know, it's also a very electric ballad with enough like swagger to just, I don't know. No, it's a really great song, one of my favorite Amorphis songs, period. And then we get to the next song on the album, which is called Cares, which is another banger with some great rhythm. And honestly, some really melodies kind of reminds you of just like that old school 80s heavy metal. And then the synths are once again a great presence, and there's a rhythm created alongside like the growling less than a minute in, and it's just another spine chiller. And this song just takes some interesting turns and some really great like techno parts and then some polka parts. It's just very interesting song. I like it. Next up is Song of the Troubled One, which also has some other great synth sounds, and then some funky guitars return behind like a great lead, and then the band crafts out one of the greatest melodies in the history of metal music, especially after 2 minutes in. And Weeper of the Shore, or can't even speak today. Weeper of the Shore, which is another kind of like folky flowing ballad, and some growling and some really great synth line and a really great killer melody between like the synths and the guitar playing around a minute in. Next up, we get to the title track, Elegy. And I think it's a great song. Has a very mesmerizing piano pattern that just extends into sort of like a climactic doomy like section, which is well worth like the 7+ minutes of the song. And now when I say doom, I mean like especially like 3 minutes in is what doom should sound like. Like it's just crushing. And it's just heavy as fuck. Relief comes next. Now the beginning has like sort of like some very spacey kind of like folk like psychedelics of the instrumental, and then sort of like an acoustic version or a vocal version, I should say. It just goes without saying that both sound really extremely loud. Then the album closes with a acoustic reprise of My Cantere, where the instrument is pretty much the same name, and just some chilling acoustic guitars to create a atmosphere that is like underlined by some great vocal performance. And both versions of this song are completely different and show sort of like the high range and sort of like the skills that Amorphis can use. Now overall, Elegy by Amorphis is another solid album to their discography. So if I were to give this album a score, I'm going to give Elegy by Amorphis a solid 9 out of 10. So yep, that's my review of the album, guys. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the album, and I'll see you all in the next video. And as always, keep it metal. Ketos.